Transatlantic slave trade. The transatlantic slave trade was one of the biggest capitalist systems in the world. At the start of the 15th century, the rush to hoard wealth became the driver to find new places to find new goods. Most European nations was built on the transatlantic slave trade, sometimes known as the triangular slave trade, bringing enslaved Africans to the West and returning with goods and resources like tobacco, sugar, coffee, chocolate, rum, and of course, rice and cotton, along with the smaller amount of trafficked people. Remember, every great wealth starts with a great crime. The majority of these people actually ended up in South America, not the United States, as most people tend to believe, and also the West Indies, after settlers and colonizers decimated countless nations and the people who lived there. Less than 1 million Africans made it to the States. In case you're curious, let's talk about the major players in the transatlantic slave trade. The majority of these captured people ended up in South America and the West Indies after settlers and colonizers decimated countless nations. Less than 1 million Africans actually made it to the States. In case you're curious, here are the major players in the transatlantic slave trade. We'll start with Portugal, Great Britain, France, Spain, Denmark, and a little Norway, the Netherlands, Sweden, and Germany. But preceding the height of the slave trade, these nations were fighting each other for the souls of what they insisted was a dark nation. They all believed they could bring their particular flavor of Christianity to Africa. Things Fall Apart, a novel by Chinua Achebe, outlined how the missionaries arrived long before the enslavers. All of these nations first sent missionaries, then later either directly chartered slave ships and merchants or hired out companies to do the work for them under the direction of their nation's crown. Portugal started the African slave trade early. They got in on the ground floor. As early as the 1500s, they were already creating what we now know as the transatlantic slave trade. Still, what made Portugal a heavy hitter in the slave trade was because beyond their companies and shipping systems, Portugal expanded its reach in other ways. Portugal had many strongholds over Africa, trade posts, known as Fetorias, and Elamina Castle, also known as St. George Castle, is one of the most well known holding areas for captured Africans. It was considered a slave castle, and it's also called the point of no return because once people arrived and were loaded on the ships, there was no going home. Portuguese slave castles or outposts also operated as shipping systems for contraband. You know, the raw goods they took with them along with the people. Check which colonized nations use Portuguese as easy as English. Brazil, I'm looking at you. Now, Spain contracted their acquisition of slave labor to other nations, also known as the Essential System. Check out Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and not all of the states, but Florida, Texas, Cali, New Mexico, just for examples. Great Britain, despite Spain and Portugal already involved in the slave trade, the English decided to get some money too. Sir John Hawkins, sometimes referred to as the pioneer of the English slave trade, basically stole ships from Portugal and Spain as a private contractor and sold the Africans. His actions made Britain gun shy about slavery until the 1600s, but it was only because they claimed land in North America, which was already thriving on a slave population. Also, the raw goods taken from Africa, gold, ivory, and antiquities, We can always just check the British Museum. Helped finance their ranking as the biggest slave trader of the North. Now, France spent more time colonizing Africa. Look at how many African nations ensure people are fluent in French, but they still dip their hands into the slave trade too. In the 1600s, the French West India Company, designated as a trading company under the French crown, attempted to push themselves on the world stage. Check out how some Gulf places, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Biloxi, St. Louis, still use French as easily as English. By the way, Anne Rice would like a word. Now, there's more to tell about these slave traders, but I'll leave it for another day. I'll get into it deeper further when I discuss Marcus Rediker's historical piece, Slave Ship, A Human History, and the Creation of Pirates. But here's a little tidbit. According to Slave Ship, A Human History, the real history of the slave trade had four major dramas at play: the tensions between the captain and his crew, the crew and the enslaved people amongst themselves, and the civil society and the slave traders. His work goes into great detail, exhuming captains' logs and letters, sailors' and slaves' personal accounts, and details from abolition cases in the United States Congress and the UK Parliament regarding the morality of slavery. Rediker paints the merchants and their businesses that profited from the slave trade as oblivious, seeing only the money to be gained and the enslaved as merely cargo, thereby having no true knowledge of the gritty, cruel process that earned them their fortunes. The sailors have their own strained relationship with the slave trade. Many of them were tricked into signing contracts and then subsequently cheated of their wages, forced into labor because of either criminal activity or being so poor that a seafaring life seemed better than their own situations. James Field Stanfield, a sailor who writes about one of the most powerful accounts of the slave trade, was used as a treatise for abolition and gives a horrifying account of Captain David Wilson. Later, Black Bart Roberts began as a sailor on a slave ship who, because of his mistreatment, became a pirate bent on pillaging slave vessels off the west coast of Africa, and then giving the trafficked Africans the choice of freedom or joining his crew in attacking other ships. In fact, several pirates started as sailors on slave ships. Consider the movie The Pirates of the Caribbean. So remember, don't walk the plank, just walk good. I know that was a lot of information and the journey is long, but remember, it's totally worth it.